Not long ago, my partner and I were driving through reservation land at about 11 o'clock at night in the desert southwest of the USA. We were on a major highway, but as with so many highways in that area, it's not very well used, just barely paved and with only one lane going in each direction. No lights, just reflectors embedded in the pavement. It's not uncommon to go for an hour on this highway without seeing another vehicle. I was reading a book aloud when suddenly my buddy who was driving interrupts and pulls off the side of the road, braking quickly. "Did you see that?" "No," I replied. "See what?" "That van. It went off of the road." I turned in my seat but couldn't make out anything. On or off the road? It was just darkness all around. He grabbed the flashlight that we keep in the car and asked me to call 911. He's in a medical profession and a lapsed licensed EMT, and I've worked in emergency response, so this isn't a super uncommon occurrence for us. Although, not even being able to see the accident was a first for me. I got on the phone with 911 immediately and set about trying to find a mile marker using my phone as a flashlight, eventually settling for giving them the appropriate GPS coordinates, as I had very little coverage and my GPS was acting flighty in that area. The dispatcher asked me to cross the highway carefully and try to ascertain the status of the passengers since they had gone straight over a hill and presumably into the canyon below. I stayed on the line while I trudged over the sand dunes on the opposite side of the highway. I was a bit nervous to be walking this area in sandals as we had just recently been discussing the rattlesnake population in the region, and I couldn't really see where I was going and answer the dispatcher's question at the same time. But the scrubby vegetation gave me some motivation, and finally I crested the largest dune and I could see the outline of the accident site. On the road, the moonlight was blocked by the dunes, but on this side it was strangely bright. It took my brain a moment to make sense of what I was seeing. They had been lucky. The van had turned on its side as it slid, and the friction from the dunes had just barely prevented the entire thing from going over the edge to the massive canyon below. My partner called out to me and asked to check on the woman in the van, and I saw that next to him, standing with a scarecrow-like stiffness, he was a young man. He looked dazed and didn't seem to be answering many questions. I got the darkest vibe off of the guy that I've ever encountered. I felt goosebumps crawling up my back, and it was just like there was a permanent ring of shadow around him. I felt very uneasy knowing that either of us were anywhere near him, and made a point to visually keep checking up on them. I proceeded to the site and around the van, and called out to identify myself. I heard the voice of a woman inside, and as I walked around the windshield, I could see her. She was crouched in the passenger cabin, clearly in shock, her feet bleeding as she shifted back and forth in the broken glass of the driver's side window. A tall, willowy woman, thin and pale with dark hair. There was also a massive wolfhound. It appeared equally stunned. I saw that they had managed to pry the passenger side door open. The man must have climbed out through the top that way. The woman spoke with me for a time, calmly and with an urgency I couldn't quite identify in her voice, and I relayed the information to the dispatcher. Yes, it was just the two of them. No, they don't seem to be seriously injured. No, nobody had fallen asleep at the wheel. They were on their way to Texas to visit family. They were living out of the van. What I remember most clearly is that I made a couple of attempts to convince her to either climb out of the roof or through the back to clear away from the van just to be safe, but she politely refused each time. She said that she didn't want to leave the dog. There was something just wrong about her demeanor. People react differently to stress, and she seemed alert and competent. I put it to the back of my mind, but I kept being struck by a strangeness in her handling of the situation. Dispatch and I agreed that the paramedics could probably easily break the windshield to free them, and there was no sign of fuel, so it was fine for her to stay in there until they arrived. Once I double-checked that she was secure and wasn't going to go anywhere, I handed off the phone to my partner while I went out to wave in the paramedics, who had accidentally passed the site and were backing toward us from farther up the highway, looking for our flashlight thanks to the dispatcher. They pulled off a ways from the site, and I began to brief them when we all heard dispatch come over the radio. Please be advised that the male passenger is AMS and considered dangerous. AMS stands for altered mental status, suggesting that someone is in the normal frame of mind for any of a variety of reasons. We all stopped in our tracks. The paramedics exchanged a glance, and one went back to the ambulance for additional equipment. I was eager to get back to my partner to make sure he hadn't communicated that to dispatch out of concern for his safety. But when we arrived on the site, they were still talking quietly. I went to my car to find shoes for the woman, The passengers were placed in different ambulances, and the police arrived to take interviews all around. After a couple of hours, when we were back to driving, my partner proceeded to film the details. When he first got to the scene, the woman was yelling that he tried to kill her, not to leave her alone with him. She also said that if he got out, he needed to be restrained as he was a danger to himself and others. The man was very eager to be out of the vehicle. Bewildered, my partner had nonetheless helped the guy pry the door open, and once he was out, the guy had just clammed up and wouldn't do much more than nod or shake his head in response to questions. He kept thinking that the guy might take off and get lost in the desert, but in the end, he had waited. He said the guy had seemed agitated, so he was doing his best to keep him engaged and distracted until help could arrive. It was chilling to realize that what we had thought was an accident was actually a murder attempt. I really wanted to accompany the woman to the hospital, but for unrelated reasons, we couldn't remain. We went back that way during the day on our return trip a week later. We pulled over at the side and climbed over the dunes to see whether they had managed to tow the van over all that sand. And sure enough, it was gone. What was unnerving was the realization, upon seeing the landscape during the day, that if he had chosen any other spot to grab the wheel, for miles in both directions, they would have been over a cliff almost immediately. In the dark, there was no way for him to tell, but he had chosen the only spot where they realistically could have survived the accident. My partner then told me that they had gone off the road when they were nearly opposite our little sedan on the highway. If the guy had opted for a head-on collision instead of the off-the-cliff option, we would have been toast. It was a sobering thought. I think of the woman I met that night often and of her wolfhound, being gingerly coaxed into the back of a police car. I really hope that they're in a much better place now. As for the guy who tried to kill them all, I certainly hope that he gets help and that we never have to meet again. I'm a 16-year-old teen at the time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and attending my first folk festival with a friend and her family. I'm a totally naive girl, completely smitten with the whole hippie thing, thinking I'm so evolved and edgy like everyone else there. Cringe. Dancing, music, attractive people, and an unspoken assumed kindness, empathy, and trust amongst total strangers. Very anti-establishment, anti-individualistic mind frame. But also anti-stranger danger because love is everywhere, and everyone is connected, and we are valued and safe, blah 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 blah. You know. I was separated from my friend at the time and walking to the festival from the campground. A tall, slim white man in a white robe approached me and started chatting me up. He was weird immediately, but it was a folk music festival. Weird is normal and normal is weird. And I'm an impressionable young girl desperately seeking approval. He told me I was beautiful, asked me where I was from, and I told him a small town an hour away. Didn't say the name. He told me he was from the States and that his name was James in the Rain, and handed me his card. In the event that I'd be interested in attending another festival that he puts on in his own community. I took the card and carried on. The festival ends, and 4 days after I've been at home, I'm at work slicing meat in a deli. James in the Rain enters the store. He immediately noticed the wristband still on my wrist and says, "You're the girl from the festival." He continues to talk to me, doesn't buy anything, and even follows me up to the cash register and talks to me about random things while I'm trying to serve other customers. At this point, I'm scared and creeped out and really want him to leave. He wouldn't leave until I gave him a hug, so I gave him one in hopes that he'd leave me alone. He left. Later, I told my mom what happened. She looked him up on Google, and turns out this guy is part of some commune called Rainbow People, who recruit young women and brainwash them into leaving their families, force them to cut off all ties with the world and join their community in the mountains. I'm going to abstain from giving too much information because this stalker scares the shit out of me. Years ago, I moved to follow my boyfriend and do a PhD in his country. I won't name the place, but it's across the ocean type of deal. At first I was very excited. It was a wonderful adventure, until it wasn't. It's hard to describe the complexity of what I felt. I felt alone, misunderstood, far from my family and friends, and even though my boyfriend is wonderful, I really felt the weight of not finding any human connection. This could explain why I acted so weird and disconnected from reality in the following story. I'm also a very naive woman, and I like to see the best in people around me. This has been problematic more than a few times, but this story is maybe the worst example of where this candid attitude got me. My boyfriend and I are into BDSM. We do it alone, on our own, and do not participate in events or anything. I do have an account on a known BDSM website. I go there to find new ideas for our sessions, and I sometimes but rarely post pictures. No face, no tattoos, and I often wear wigs. I get contacted by interesting doms once in a while, even though I clearly state I'm not free. Usually they send copy-paste messages, so I just ignore them. Once in a while though, I'd get a more personal message and to make an effort to answer that I am not interested, that I am in a relationship. This is how my discussion with Nick started. He didn't approach me with a, "will you be my sub?" but with curiosity about how I got into BDSM, stating he was quite new to the domain and was interested in understanding the way of life. So I explained. Explanations turned into discussions. He told me that he was a police officer and that he investigated drug cartels. He also told me that he was married and that he had kids. Interestingly, we had a lot of hobbies in common, like a lot. I won't go into details about those hobbies, but they're kind of specific. Feeling very lonely, combined with the fact that I felt like I could trust him because he was married and had kids, I accepted his invitation to start texting on WhatsApp. I want to be clear, my boyfriend knew about this from day one. Plus, we had been talking on this website for almost 3 months before switching to WhatsApp. He was very friendly and interested by my day-to-day life. He would share pictures of his kids and of investigations he was working on. This went on for another 3 months. Then one day, he told me he had to interview a suspect close to the town where I lived, and asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, and we met for the first time. Before anyone panics, my boyfriend was hiking with friends for a few weeks. I texted him, but he didn't have signal. Plus, we have a very trusting relationship. He has a lot of girlfriends, and back in my country, I hung out with a lot of boys. This isn't weird for us. Back to this first encounter. It felt as if we had known each other for years. We had a great time from the beginning, and I was just happy I found a friend far from my country. He knew I loved reading thrillers and enjoyed murder and investigation videos, so he showed me his gear, handcuffs, sampling kits for small investigations, other restraints, etc. It didn't feel weird at that moment, but afterwards I kind of understood this could have been a way for him to show off of what he could do. However, as the night went on and grabbing drinks from a nearby bar, he forced me against a wall and kissed me. I was shocked, really, and barely managed to push him off me. I told him it was inappropriate, that he was married and that I was in a relationship. He said he was really sorry and felt ashamed. He told me that he felt there was something between us, and I was like, yeah, it's called friendship. I was disappointed, and we parted ways. Days later, after he apologized over and over again, he called me to meet up. He wanted to take me for a ride in his hometown. It's a pretty place. He's got a bike and wants me to enjoy the scenery in this country I barely know. I agree. It's his hometown. He works there. He lives there with his wife and kids. Surely I'll be safe. In short, I wasn't. Again, he kissed me, tried to push for more, in the middle of a park. A park where he brought his children to play on the weekends. So I told him to bring me back to the bus station so I could leave. He did, and then proceeded to tell me about a story how he had recently got a drug seller out of hiding by modifying text messages sent by his girlfriend. He basically made him believe she was cheating on him to get him to confront her and then arrested him. I don't know if it's true, I don't know if it's possible. Due to what just happened, what I heard was, I can make your boyfriend believe you were cheating on him. And my boyfriend was still on his hike by that time. We did talk once every few days, and I told him everything from the moment he had some cell signal. Meanwhile, I was confronting Nick about that. His behavior was really strange, as he went from, "I'm sorry, I think I'm in love with you," to, "If you tell the cops, who do you think they'll believe? Their colleague or an immigrant?" I got scared and tried to cool things down with him. I just felt he could go crazy at any moment. He clearly wasn't used to girls refusing him. At that point, I thought it would be safer for me and my boyfriend to maintain contact with Nick, albeit with less enthusiasm than before. But after understanding how obsessed he was, I blocked him from all platforms where I knew he had an account. But he found me. He sent me my address, asking if I loved living in that particular part of town. I never gave him my address. Guess he could pull some strings at the station to get my info. He even came to visit me at my job. I was so scared, I just played it as if everything was okay. I told him my boyfriend wanted me to cut ties with him because he was angry about what had happened, which was true. but I also wanted him out of my life. I didn't know how he would react if I told him, however. Nick insisted that I loved him, that I could be his mistress, that my boyfriend didn't have to know. He was obsessed by me and didn't hide it anymore. He told me the things he wanted to do to me, and how we'd be a great couple, how he'd father our kids. I refused again and again, blocking him, changing my accounts, etc. I got scared when I got calls from unknown numbers. I was terrified when I saw anyone slowing down on a motorcycle close to my apartment. I was wary of going outside and going to my job. The quarantine was welcome for me, really, and I didn't get any news from him for months. And then I broke my cell phone. I knew I could transfer all my numbers from one phone to the other, but I didn't know it would unblock previously blocked numbers. Days later, I got a message from him. He told me he had divorced his wife, that he still loved me, that he wanted to marry me. He apologized for making me believe I was only mistress material, and that I was worth so much more. He said my boyfriend didn't love me and that I deserved better, that he was waiting for me. When he saw that I saw his message, he said, "Finally, I thought you'd never unblock me." Does this mean he had been sending this message over and over again in hopes I'd finally seen it? That narcissistic man used all the manipulation tactics he knew. He had told me before we met in person how he had learned those skills to toy with criminals, to have them tell the truth and admit to crimes. Fortunately, I had dated manipulative men before and knew the signs. Basically, he wasn't used to not getting what he wanted. He was attractive, rich, interesting, and he knew that. I blocked him again, and we moved a few months later. I just hope he doesn't get his hands on this information. I believe Nick's last move was trying to hack into my Instagram, as I got a notification that someone from his hometown had tried to connect to my account.